The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. Inside the Montgomery family's new home on the West Coast, laughter echoed through the rooms. It was a sound Julian had once thought he would never hear again. He stood, quietly in the doorway, watching his children. His son, who had once lived in silence, was now chattering as he built a tower of blocks, carefully balancing each piece with a proud smile. Across the room, his daughter sat at the piano, her small fingers pressing the keys with surprising confidence. The melody of a soft song filled the air, reminding Julian of his late wife. The resemblance was almost too much to bear, yet it also healed something inside him. He still remembered the night when this girl had appeared, ragged and hungry, asking only for leftovers. That night she gave him something no doctor, no fortune, no effort could ever provide. She gave his son a voice. And more than that, she gave him back his family. Life had not been easy since then. There had been investigations, painful truths, and long nights of guilt. But the DNA test had ended all doubt. She was his child, his daughter, stolen at birth and left to suffer years without love. The thought still made his chest tighten. He had been a man who built an empire, yet he had failed to protect his own blood. He had lost 7 years with her, 7 years of laughter, tears, and first words. Those years were gone forever. But what mattered now was that she was here, safe, and finally home. He walked into the room and knelt beside Leo, who was adding the final block to his tower. The boy looked up with bright eyes. "Dad, look," he said proudly. Julian's throat tightened at the sound of his voice. He had waited so long to hear simple words like that, and now they felt like a miracle every time. "It's perfect," Julian said softly, ruffling his son's hair. The tower wobbled, but stood tall, a small symbol of the strength his children now carried together. At the piano, she kept playing, lost in the music. When she finished the piece, she turned her head shyly, as if unsure whether she had done well. "That was beautiful," Julian told her, his voice steady. "Your mother used to play that same piece." Her eyes widened. "Really?" she asked, softly. He nodded. "Yes. You play like her. You have her gift." A small smile tugged at her lips, the kind that showed she was still learning how to trust joy, still learning how to believe she belonged here. Later that night, Julian moved, quietly down the hallway. He stopped in the doorway between his children's rooms. Leo had fallen asleep with his toy blocks scattered on the bed, while his sister lay curled up under the blankets, her hair spread across the pillow. She stirred and opened her eyes. "Dad?" she whispered. He stepped inside and sat beside her. "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated, her voice barely above a breath. "Do you think Mom knows we're okay now?" The question hit him deep. He looked into her young face, so full of strength and scars, and thought of his wife, the woman who had given him these children but had not lived to see them grow. He reached down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "I think," he said gently, "she's the one who sent you back to us that night. I think she made sure you found your way home." The girl closed her eyes and smiled faintly, comforted by the thought. Within minutes she was asleep again, her breathing soft and steady. Julian sat there a while longer, listening to the sound of his children resting. The silence in the house was no longer empty or painful. It was full of peace, full of hope. He rose quietly and stood again in the hallway, looking from one door to the other. A year ago, he had believed he was destined to live with silence forever, chained by grief and failure. Then a little girl had stepped out of the shadows and changed everything with a simple plea for leftovers. That plea had brought him not only his son's voice, but the daughter he never knew was missing. Julian closed his eyes and whispered a quiet thank you, to fate, to love, to whatever power had woven these invisible threads back together. His family had been broken, but now, piece by piece, they were whole again. The night air was sharp, carrying the smell of rain and city smoke. Julian held his son's small hand as they walked toward the golden doors of the restaurant. The boy, silent as always, moved like a shadow beside him. To the outside world, Julian Montgomery was untouchable, a man of wealth and power. Yet inside, he felt fragile. He had all the money in the world, but he could not buy the sound of his son's voice. Just as they reached the steps, movement stirred in the corner of his vision. From the shadows of a narrow alley, a thin figure stepped forward. It was a girl no older than Leo, her frame swallowed by rags, her hair tangled and wild. She should have looked weak, but there was something in her eyes, something unshakable, that made Julian pause. "Sir," she said, her voice hoarse from the cold. He didn't even look at her at first. His reply came out sharp, automatic. "I don't carry cash." The girl stepped closer, her gaze fixed not on him but on Leo. "I don't want money," she said, and her tone was steady now. "I can help him." Julian froze. Slowly, his head turned toward her, his disbelief written across his face. "Help him? Do you even know who he is?" His voice carried the clipped edge of impatience. She didn't flinch. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed straight at Leo. "I can make him talk." The words hit Julian like a slap. For years, the best doctors on 3 continents had failed to reach his boy. Specialists, therapists, experts with endless lists of degrees, they had all tried, and every attempt had ended in silence. Now, this ragged child from the street stood before him, claiming she could do what no one else had done. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was harsh, a bitter crack in the night air. "Listen, child," he said coldly. "You don't know what you're saying. My son doesn't speak. He hasn't in years. You can't fix him, no one can." But the girl didn't back away. She stood straighter, her small shoulders squared with surprising resolve. "If I do it," she said, her voice firm now, "will you give me your leftovers?" Julian blinked, stunned by the absurdity of her request. Not money, not shelter, just leftovers. Food. The kind of food his staff threw away every night without a second thought. For her, it was a prize worth fighting for. He wanted to dismiss her, to call the doorman and have her removed. But something in her eyes stopped him. They weren't begging eyes. They weren't pleading. They were certain. Certain in a way that made his chest tighten. He glanced at Leo, expecting him to be lost in his usual blank stare. Instead, Julian saw something different. The boy was watching the girl. Really watching. His gaze was locked on her with an intensity Julian had never seen before. The girl took one step closer. The crowd at the restaurant's entrance had started to notice. Whispers spread, patrons staring at the billionaire father, his silent son, and the street child who dared to block their path. Julian felt the heat of their judgment on his back. He tried to guide Leo forward, but his son resisted, his small hand stiff in his father's grip. Then it happened. Leo's lips parted. For years, Julian had waited for this moment, prayed for it in hospital waiting rooms and sleepless nights. His boy's voice broke the silence like a fragile thread snapping. A single word, faint but clear, slipped out into the night air. He said her name. Julian's world tilted. His legs felt weak. He looked at his son, then at the girl, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The impossible had happened. His son, his silent son, had spoken. The girl's face didn't show surprise. She looked almost calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment too. She stepped forward, her eyes soft now, and held out her hand. Leo pulled free from his father's grip for the first time in years and moved toward her. Julian's heart pounded. Questions collided in his mind, tearing at the walls of reason. How did his son know her name? Why did their faces look so strangely, alike in the glow of the restaurant lights? "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice breaking with fear and awe. The girl turned her gaze on him, steady and certain. "I think," she said quietly, "he's my brother." Julian's breath caught in his throat. The girl's words echoed in his mind like thunder. Brother. The idea was too wild, too impossible, and yet his son's sudden voice, the way he had spoken her name, it all gnawed at his certainty. He had lived with silence for years, and now in one instant a stranger had broken it. Leo stood close to her now, his small fingers brushing against her dirt-stained hand. The boy's eyes, usually glassy and unfocused, burned with recognition. It was as though he had found something he had been missing his whole life and he wasn't about to let it go. Julian's chest tightened. He wanted to pull his son back, to protect him, but his own body wouldn't move. All his logic, all his reason suddenly seemed weak against this strange connection unfolding before him. The doorman cleared his throat nervously. Guests were staring openly now, whispering to one another. "Isn't that the Montgomery boy? Did you hear that?" He spoke. "Who is that girl?" The questions buzzed around Julian, a painful reminder that his private world of grief was now exposed for everyone to see. He forced a laugh, trying to cover the tremor in his voice. "This is nonsense. She's just a child from the streets. Leo doesn't know her." But even as the words left his mouth, he could feel they were hollow. He looked at his son again. Leo's small face glowed with something Julian had never seen before: hope. The girl stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. "You can take me away if you want," she said softly. "But he knows me. He always has." Julian felt his world tilt. Memories from years ago clawed their way to the surface. The chaos in the delivery room, the doctors shouting, the way he had been shoved out into the hallway while his wife bled. They had told him there was only one child, one son. He had accepted it because he had no choice, but what if there had been more? His mind rebelled against the thought, but his heart clenched with a fear he could not name. He couldn't argue with what he had just heard. His boy had spoken, and not just any word. Her name. He ran a hand over his face, his carefully built mask cracking. "Enough," he muttered. "We're leaving." He reached for Leo's hand, but the boy resisted, pressing himself closer to the girl. For years, Julian had guided his son like a fragile puppet, and now, for the first time, Leo pushed back. Something inside Julian gave way. He couldn't drag the boy away from the one person who had sparked life in him. He exhaled slowly, defeated. "Fine," he said tightly, "come with us." The girl blinked in surprise. For a moment he thought she might run, vanish back into the dark alley she had emerged from. But she nodded, her chin lifting with quiet resolve. Inside the restaurant, the lights were warm, the air thick with perfume and the clatter of silverware. It was a world far removed from the girls. She shrank at the stares of finely dressed patrons, clutching her thin arms as if they could shield her from judgment. Julian walked ahead, his grip firm on Leo's shoulder, trying to hold his dignity, together as whispers followed them to their table. When they sat down, something remarkable happened. Leo, who had never touched the crayons or menus given to him at restaurants before, reached across the table for the girl's hand. She gave him a smile, a small knowing smile, and slid a napkin toward him. Then she began to draw simple shapes with a borrowed pen. A circle, a line, a square. Slowly, Leo picked up a crayon and copied her movements. For the first time in years, his father saw his son engaged, focused, alive. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He had spent fortunes chasing miracles in sterile clinics and therapy rooms. And yet here, in the glow of a restaurant, a little girl who had asked for nothing more than scraps was unlocking something in his son. He could barely whisper the question that formed on his lips. "Who are you?" The girl looked up at him with steady eyes, not a flicker of doubt in them. "My name is Ara," she said softly, "and I think I'm your daughter." The words landed like stones in Julian's chest. The restaurant around him blurred, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading away. All he could see was the fragile boy beside him and the fierce, ragged girl across the table. And for the first time in years, he realized his world was no longer built on numbers, deals, or wealth. It was built on a truth he wasn't ready to face. His family was far from complete. The street felt louder once they left the restaurant, yet Julian heard only the drum of his own heart. Ara walked beside them, small and thin, keeping a careful distance as if one wrong step could send her back into the dark. Leo would not let go of her sleeve. He held it with 2 fingers, gentle but sure, and looked up at her as if checking that she was still real. The town car pulled to the curb. The driver opened the door. Julian guided both children inside, then sat across from them, knees tight together, hands pressed to his thighs. He studied Ara in the dim light of the cabin. Dirt on her knuckles, a scrape on her elbow, a stubborn lift to her chin. She did not look like a miracle worker, yet his boy had spoken. Reason told him to be cautious. His heart had already chosen. The car moved through the city. Skyscrapers slid by like silent judges. Leo leaned his head on Ara's shoulder. She did not stiffen or push him away. She shifted slightly so he could rest better. Her eyes stayed on the window, alert, counting streetlights, tracing turns, memorizing a path in case she needed it later. Julian noticed the habit and filed it away. This child did not move through the world by accident. She measured exits. She listened for danger. She planned. They reached the building. Security knew Julian's face and did not ask questions. Inside, the elevator, Ara's breath grew shallow. The mirrored walls made her small frame look even smaller. Leo squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. A tiny exchange. Yet to Julian it felt like a bridge being built brick by brick. The penthouse door opened to soft light and quiet air. Fresh flowers on a table. Framed photos of a woman at a piano. The city spread beyond the glass like a field of stars. Ara stepped across the threshold and froze, as if the silence itself might swallow her. Julian saw fear flash across her face. He spoke gently. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will hurt you. You can leave if you want, but I hope you will stay tonight. We will get you clean clothes, a warm meal, and a doctor for Leo in the morning." At the word doctor, Leo's fingers tightened. Ara felt it and nodded to him. "We will be together," she whispered. The boy relaxed. Julian called his sister. Her voice was a steady anchor. She promised to come first thing. He called the on-call pediatrician and left a message. Then he set down his phone and faced the children. "Are you hungry?" Ara hesitated, then gave a small nod. He led them to the kitchen. The staff had gone for the night, but the fridge was full. He warmed soup, sliced bread, put fruit on a plate. He placed the food on the island and stepped back so she could see it was meant for her. Ara ate slowly at first, then with steady focus, not greedy, not wild, just careful, as if every bite was a promise she did not quite trust. Leo watched her eat. When she picked a grape and rolled it between her fingers before chewing, he copied her. When she dipped bread into soup, he did the same. It was not mockery. It was learning. Julian felt heat sting his eyes. This was the most natural therapy he had ever seen. No flashcards, no charts, only presence and patience. After dinner, he showed Ara the guest bath. Steam rose, lavender soap on the counter, a soft towel on the hook. She touched the towel like it might vanish. Clean water did not frighten her. She stepped into the bath and closed the door. When she came out, her hair was a dark curtain down her back, her face new and bright without the city's dust. The resemblance to Leo sharpened. Same brow line, same chin, same private look that said more than words. Julian had a small set of pajamas from when Leo was younger. They fit Ara well enough for the night. She held herself with more care now, as if the warm skin and soft cloth had reminded her she was a child, not a ghost. In the living room, Leo pointed at a wooden puzzle box on the shelf. He had never touched it before. Ara picked it up, turned it over in her hands, listened for the click of hidden parts. She tapped the corners in a pattern, paused, then tapped again. A seam opened. The lid popped. Leo's mouth fell open. His laugh burst out, bright and full. The sound rolled through the room like sunlight. Julian covered his mouth with his hand to steady himself. His boy was laughing, his boy was watching, his boy was here. "Where did you learn that?" Julian asked. Ara shrugged. Someone showed me once, she said, and then she looked away. No story, no drama. Truth in simple lines. He knelt to their level. Tomorrow, he said softly, a doctor will come to check Leo. I would like to ask for a DNA test, too. Only, if you agree, it can tell us how we are connected. Ara considered this. Her eyes did not flinch. If it tells you I am not your family, will you send me away? She asked. Julian swallowed. The question landed heavy. He took a slow breath. You brought my son back to me. Whatever a paper says, I will not let you go hungry or alone again. She nodded once, accepting the terms like a small businesswoman striking a deal. Then yes, she said. Night settled. Julian made a bed for Ara in the quiet room near Leo's. She stood in the doorway and looked at the wide mattress, the careful sheets, the lamp with a soft glow. She pulled the blanket to the floor and lay in the corner on the rug. He started to protest, then stopped. Safety has different shapes. For her, a wall at her back was safety. He placed an extra blanket near her feet and dimmed the light. He checked on Leo. The boy lay awake, eyes fixed on the door that led to Ara's room. Julian smiled and left both doors open. A small thing, but it turned 2 rooms into 1. In the dead hours, Julian paced the hall. He tried not to think of the delivery room. He failed. He saw the rush of nurses, the sharp smell, the white lights, the doctor's urgent orders. He had been told to wait outside. He had been told to pray. He had been handed 1 baby and 1 loss. He had never asked if there had been 2 cries before there was 1. The thought burned. He called Leo's longtime specialist and left another message. He called his investigator, a man who found the unfindable, and said 3 words. Start with Boston. Before dawn, footsteps sounded on the marble. Ara stood in the hallway with a slice of bread in her hand. She had taken it from the kitchen and wrapped it in a napkin. She looked guilty, then defensive, then tired. Julian nodded toward the bread. You like to keep food close, he said. That makes sense. Keep it. Her shoulders eased. Trust is built in small permissions. Leo came out in his pajamas and went straight to her. Stay, he said, the word rough but clear. Ara touched his hair. I will. Morning light climbed the glass. A knock came at the door. The specialist had arrived sooner than expected, eyes wide when he saw Leo's alert face and Ara at his side. He tested reflexes, tracked eye movement, asked simple questions. Leo made sounds, then words, short and brave. The doctor set down his pen. I have never seen progress move this fast, he said in a careful voice. Something has changed in his brain. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it. Julian looked at the children. He did not have a formula to write down. He had a sister found by chance or fate, a bond older than memory, and a thin thread of hope that refused to break. He signed the form for the DNA test. He held the pen a second longer than needed. Then he set it down and faced Ara. No matter what the result is, you are not leaving, he said. Her eyes flickered. A shield dropped. For the first time, she let out a breath that sounded like relief. She reached for Leo's hand. He took it and stood taller. The city roared below the windows. Inside the penthouse, a quieter sound took root. It was the sound of a family beginning. The days passed, and though Ara now had clean clothes and warm meals, she never seemed to breathe freely. The penthouse was vast and polished, filled with soft carpets that muffled every step. For Julian, silence was a luxury. For Ara, silence was a prison. She had grown used to the city's noise, the rumble of trains under the grates, the shouts of vendors, the hum of traffic that wrapped her like a blanket. Here, there was only the faint hum of air vents and the tick of an expensive clock. She tried to adapt. She copied the way the staff placed napkins on their laps, how they used forks instead of fingers. She nodded politely when Julian's sister explained which clothes matched which shoes. But inside, Ara felt smaller with every correction. The penthouse was not a home. It was a museum where she was the one exhibit out of place. At night, she did not sleep in the soft bed Julian had prepared. She pulled the blanket to the floor and curled up against the wall, as she had done in alleys and shelters. The mattress was too soft, the pillows too deep. The wall gave her something solid to press against, something real. Her old habits clung to her. She tucked rolls of bread into her pockets, hid apples under the bed, and saved scraps of food she could not finish. One morning, a housekeeper found her small stash. The woman's voice was kind. "Sweetheart, you don't need to do this. You can have all the food you want." But Ara heard only judgment. Her cheeks burned. She turned her face away so no one would see her shame. That night she dreamed again. She was floating in warm darkness, her hand holding another's. But this time the hand slipped away. She reached, grasped, cried out, but the hand was gone, and she was falling into a cold, endless void. She woke with tears on her face, her chest heaving. The silence of the room pressed down on her like a weight. She couldn't do it anymore. Slowly, she pulled out the ragged clothes she had hidden at the back of the closet. They smelled faintly of smoke and rain, but they felt like her true skin. She slipped them on, tied her shoes tight, and moved through the penthouse with quiet steps learned from years of survival. The service elevator waited at the end of the hall. Her heart pounded. With every step she told herself she would go, back to the streets. There she might be cold and hungry, but at least she would be herself. She pressed the button. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Leo was standing inside. His hair was messy, his little blue pajamas wrinkled from sleep. He looked at her, his eyes wide and questioning. Ara froze, caught like a thief. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She turned her face, ashamed. Leo stepped closer. For a moment she thought he might scream or call for his father. Instead, he reached out with his small hand and clumsily wiped the tear from her cheek. His fingers were warm against her skin. His lips moved, and his voice, soft but clear, broke the silence. "Don't go." Ara's chest tightened. She stared at him, unable to move, unable to breathe. He spoke again, stronger this time. "Don't leave me again." The words shattered the walls she had built inside herself. Years of loneliness, of pretending she didn't care, of hiding her hunger and fear. Everything broke loose. She sank to the cold floor, burying her face in her knees as sobs tore out of her. Not quiet tears, but deep, raw cries that shook her body. Leo didn't retreat. He sat down beside her, pressed his small arm around her shoulders, and held her as tightly as he could. His head rested against hers. She could feel his breath, his warmth, his quiet strength. For the first time, Ara allowed herself to cry like the child she was. And for the first time, Leo showed he was more than a silent shadow. He was a brother, reaching out to her, refusing to let her go. The envelope sat on Julian's desk like a stone. Days had passed since he signed the papers, and still, he couldn't bring himself to tear it open. The silence of the penthouse was different now, not empty but heavy with waiting. Ara moved quietly through the rooms, always close to Leo, never straying too far from his side. And Leo, he was changing every day. The boy who once never spoke now whispered words to his sister. He hummed, laughed, and even strung together short sentences. Julian found himself standing in doorways, watching them with a mixture of awe and fear. If the test confirmed what his heart already knew, then the guilt of 7 lost years would fall squarely on his shoulders. And if it didn't, what then? Finally, late one night, Julian broke. His hands shook as he sliced the envelope open. His eyes scanned the scientific jargon until they landed on the conclusion: probability of full sibling relationship, 99.9998%. He sank into his chair. The air left his lungs in a rush. She was his. She was his daughter. The joy was sharp and sudden, but it carried weight. Anger boiled beneath it. Someone had stolen her life, stolen her childhood, stolen his chance to be a father to her. He clenched the paper in his fist, his mind already racing through questions. Who had done it? And why? The answers would come later. For now, he had to face something greater, introducing Ara to the world. The annual Children's Hospital Gala loomed on the calendar. It was an event filled with donors, doctors, and politicians, a place where whispers spread faster than champagne bubbles. Julian had thought of skipping it, but his sister insisted. "You can't hide," she told him. "Not anymore. You go with both your children, and you stand tall." So he did. The ballroom shimmered with light and music. Julian entered in his tuxedo, tall and commanding. At his side, Leo held his hand, his little suit making him look impossibly small yet proud. On his other side walked Ara, wearing a simple velvet dress that Julian's sister had chosen. She looked nervous, her fingers tightening around the fabric. But she stayed close to Leo, and that gave her courage. Whispers swept through the crowd. "That's Montgomery. Look at the boy. He's speaking now. And who's the girl?" Some stared in awe, others in doubt. Julian ignored them all. For the first time, he felt no shame in their eyes, only pride. The evening began better than he had dared to hope. Leo giggled when a doctor shook his hand. Ara smiled shyly when guests complimented her dress. For a moment, Julian believed the worst was behind them. Then the commotion started at the doors. A man and woman shoved their way past security, their voices sharp and ugly. "We have an invitation." "That girl is ours." The woman's finger pointed straight at Ara. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Julian's blood ran cold. He recognized the names his investigator had whispered. Foster parents. The Petersons. They did not look like saviors. Their clothes were loud and cheap, their faces mean and greedy. Ara froze, her body rigid. Terror filled her eyes, the old hunted look returning in an instant. She shrank behind Julian's leg. Leo stepped forward, his small frame trembling but firm. "Go away," he said loudly, his voice shaking but clear. "She's my sister," the man sneered. "She belongs to us. We raised her. We have rights." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes fixed on Julian. This was the public spectacle he had dreaded for years. But when he looked down at Ara, her tiny body trembling, her hand gripping his pant leg, something inside him hardened. He saw her not as a stranger or a mystery, but as his child. He straightened to his full height, his voice calm but thunderous as it rolled across the ballroom. "For those of you who know my story, you know I have lived with silence. You know my son spoke for the first time only when this girl appeared. What you do not know is the truth. This isn't just some child who helped my son. This is my daughter. DNA confirmed it. She is Leo's twin sister, stolen from me at birth." Gasps filled the room. The Petersons' faces drained of color. Julian's voice sharpened. "These people are frauds, seeking money and nothing else. They will face the law before this night is over." Then he looked down at Ara, his voice softening. "This girl has survived more than anyone here can imagine. She is not a burden. She is not a victim. She is brilliant. She is brave. And she is my daughter. She is home. And no one will take her away from me again." He bent down and pulled both children into his arms. The crowd, which had moments before been whispering in scandal, erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, a wave of support that swept through the room. For the first time, Julian felt the weight lift. The truth was no longer hidden. His children were no longer secrets. They were his, and the world knew it. The night of the gala had ended with applause, but the echoes of that moment followed Julian for weeks. Reporters filled newspapers with the story of a billionaire who had found his lost daughter. Investigators dug through old hospital records, piecing together the scandal of a child stolen at birth. For Julian, none of the noise mattered. All that mattered was that his children were finally together under one roof. At first, Ara still woke in the night, her breath shallow, her body curled in the corner of her room instead of her bed. Julian would find her there and say nothing, Just bring her a glass of water and place another blanket over her shoulders. Trust could not be forced. It had to grow like a seed. Slowly, it did. Leo changed too. Every day he spoke more. At breakfast, he would point to fruit and whisper its name. At night he would crawl onto the couch beside Ara, giggling at jokes only they seemed to understand. It was as if the two of them shared a secret rhythm, a silent music that carried them along. Julian often stood back watching in quiet wonder. For years he had lived with guilt so heavy it had shaped his shoulders. Now for the first time he felt something lighter. Not freedom, he knew the scars would never vanish, but hope. Months later, the investigation uncovered the truth. Retired nurse came forward with trembling hands and a story she had held in her heart for too long. She had seen the twins born that night, one struggling boy and one healthy girl. She had seen the doctor take the girl away, and she had carried the guilt like a weight every single day since. She handed Julian a small faded baby blanket, initials stitched in the corner. Ara's blanket. Proof. When Julian showed it to her, Ara ran her fingers across the worn fabric, her eyes wide. She didn't cry. She simply held it to her chest and whispered, "Mine." Justice came swiftly after that. Records revealed lies, falsified charts, a system too willing to look the other way. The ones who had pretended to be her guardians were exposed as frauds, their claims collapsing under evidence. For Ara, the fight was finally over. She didn't have to run anymore. A year passed. The family moved to a quieter home near the ocean. The house was filled not with silence but with sound. The sound of Leo practicing new words. The sound of Ara at the piano. The sound of laughter spilling through the halls. For Julian, each note was a miracle. One evening, he stood by the window as the sun sank into the Pacific. Ara was at the piano, her small hands flying over the keys with surprising skill. Julian had shown her a video of her late mother once playing that very piece, and Ara had learned it by ear. Her music filled the house with life. Leo sat on the floor nearby, building an elaborate bridge with his blocks. He was focused, determined, speaking softly to himself as he worked. Occasionally he would glance at Ara, and she would smile back as if to say, "I'm here." Julian's chest ached as he watched. He had spent years building empires, chasing power, yet here, in the simple sound of his children, was everything he had ever needed. Later that night, as he tucked Ara into bed, she turned her face toward him. "Dad," she whispered, the word still new on her tongue. "Do you think Mom knows we're okay now?" Julian paused. Her question carried the weight of all the years they had lost, all the pain they had endured. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and kissed her gently. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I think she's the one who sent you to us. That night when you stepped out of the shadows, I believe your mother guided you home." Ara's eyes softened. She pulled the old blanket to her chest and closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as she drifted into sleep. Julian stepped into the hallway and stood between his children's rooms. For a moment, he simply listened. The quiet was no longer empty. It was no longer the silence that haunted him. It was the silence of peace, of safety, of family. He thought back to that night outside the restaurant, the girl who had asked only for leftovers, and the boy who had spoken for the first time. That simple exchange had rewritten his life. She hadn't just given Leo a voice. She had given them all a chance to begin again. Julian closed his eyes and whispered a thank you, not to wealth, not to power, but to the invisible thread that had bound his family together all along. The thread that had pulled Ara from the streets and Leo from silence. His family was whole again, and he would never let them be broken apart.